Well, it's official. 2023 was the hottest year ever recorded. The COP28 climate summit held in Dubai in late November and early December had its work cut out. So what was agreed, and will it make any difference? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Arguments over reconstruction funds for those affected by climate change and phasing out fossil fuels dominated the COP28 summit. So was there enough agreement to bring about meaningful and urgent change?
A meeting of global leaders, policymakers, movers and shakers comes to an end.
Hearing no objections, it is so decided.
At its conclusion, a feeling of achievement.
The fact is that this document sends very strong messages to the world.
The European Commission President hailed it as a turning point. But getting to a final statement required hours of negotiation, with a final text agreeing to accelerate the phase down of unabated coal power, phasing out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, and other measures that drive the transition away from fossil fuels in energy systems. But for some, it didn't go far enough.
It's almost like they gave us like a really bad first text to say that they gave us like 2 crumbs, and then in this new text they have fossil fuels in, which is a little bit of a win, but then that's 3 crumbs. It's still crumbs. You can't try and give us little increments when we need big change.
Low-lying countries like Samoa are at real risk of disappearing completely as ocean levels rise. It's many of the poorest countries which are most affected by climate change. The stocktake at COP28 recognized global greenhouse gas emissions need to be cut by 43% by 2030 to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. That's the yellow line. If the pledges made at COP28 are fully implemented, more than 10 billion tons of CO2 will still be released. And there'll be about 30 billion tons of emission if nothing changes from now. What's clear is that without a substantial shift in the way we live, the high temperatures and extreme weather will only get worse. So is this actually the turning point hailed at the summit, and so desperately needed by the planet?
One of the high-profile attendees at the COP summit was Andrew Twiggy Forrest. He's the executive chairman of the Australian mining giant Fortescue and co-founder of the Minderoo Foundation. It's a philanthropic organisation focused on reducing inequality and other systemic global problems. He also happens to be among the world's richest people ever. He spoke to me from the World Economic Forum in Davos in Switzerland, and I began by asking him how the increased representation of the fossil fuel industry affected the overall outcome of that summit.
And look, can I just say COP28 came at really the best possible time of the worst possible strategy which the fossil fuel industry is prosecuted to keep their name out of. I mean, can you believe this, Enda? They've kept fossil fuel out of being responsible for global warming for 27 of these COP years. Finally, it was pushed through that they had to admit culpability, that we've got to wind down on fossil fuels. Well, let's all slow clap. The world has known that. But now that it's out there, Enda, we have to crack on and remove fossil fuels from our system. You've got, in atmospheric time, you've seen the acceleration in temperatures from 1.5 over the last several months, 1.7 the last 2 months, the hottest year on record. If you look at atmospheric timing, this is like a vertical takeoff. It's really scary for scientists around the world. I am scared of it, but as an industrialist, I'm saying to every single other industrialist, great shows like this should ask one question to everyone they have on who's responsible for industry: when are you going to stop burning fossil fuel? That's the question. If they say 2050, you know they're just greenwashers.
How did you feel, Andrew, seeing all these lobbyists then turn up because the fossil fuel industry turned out in force at that COP?
The public want an energy which doesn't destroy the kids. The public do not want an energy which is destroying the kids. So to every energy company in the world, you've got to give your public choice now. And to every fossil fuel company, there is no more just talk. There's no more sending you thousands of little lobbyists and your thousands of little green men to try and remove the word fossil fuel as the reason why we have global warming descending upon us at rate now. take your little green men out, get on to your scientists, get on to your engineers and say, send us into an energy which will not destroy our customers' future. That's who you should be sending to COP, not lobbyists, not liars, not people who are going to deny that fossil fuel is the cause for this rapidly accelerating temperature we're going to suffer now more and more in the world.
Andrew, you're on record as saying that if leaders can't lead, they should get off the stage. Those are your words, not mine. When you say these things, how is that received by business leaders, politicians?
Well, it's actually received pragmatically face to face. When they know that we've sailed in a green ship into COP28, when they know that this massive industrial complex which burns 1 billion litres of diesel a year is going fully beyond fossil fuel in the next few years, not the next few years, Enda, the next few years, when they know the solutions are right there in front of them, they know if they say they can't do it, I'm going to agree with them. And I say, you're right, mate. You can't do it, so get off the stage and let on someone with a bit more ability, a bit more vision, who's going to stop reaching for the lobbyists in the phone book and reach for your hard-working engineers, ask them how to do it. They'll come up with solutions like that. Give them a shot as opposed to your little green lobbyists, because they're not going to wash. When you go home that night and say to your kids, hey, I just spun another line. Sorry, kids, your future's looking really bleak. They're going to say, hey, mum, hey, dad, get off the stage, let on someone with a bit of talent. It's clearly not you.
Andrew, critics over the years have accused you of making a vast fortune out of mining, which is not the cleanest of industries by any stretch. What do you say back to them, when they accuse you of being such an extremely wealthy man and now suddenly taking an interest in the environment?
I'd say, look, I completely agree, but don't look beyond yourself either. Look at yourself. How did you drive to work? What house are you in? Was it made out of metal? Was it made out of anything to do with fossil fuel? The answer is absolutely yes. It's actually up to industry players like me to be able to say to all those critics, yes, you deserve green iron. You deserve green iron ore. You deserve green steel. You deserve green energy. My job is to change. The whole world needs to change. If someone attacks me for being the first to change, you know they don't have any interest in the subject at all. They're actually wanting to perpetuate, propagate the problem. Otherwise, they wouldn't attack someone who's the first in the world to make massive industrial change. So I just say to those people, sure, have your shots, but in doing so, have your shots at everybody else, because I'd rather do something great and do it tough than be sitting back and just shooting arrows in other people's backs.
And Andrew, you're on record as saying that you want your company to get to real zero by 2030. Just explain to me what you mean. We understand net zero. What does real zero mean?
Okay, so net zero means involving carbon credits, which I think are a dubious environmental value at best, where you're burning off heaps of forest land and saying, well, it could be burnt off anyway, so if I burn it off in a cooler way than a hotter way, then I get a credit. You actually know what they're really doing is just burning off forests. So that's the kind of logic which carbon credits are based on. I'm saying we don't need crummy carbon credits. What we need is companies to just stop burning fossil fuel. The question is to every industrialist like me is, when are you going to stop burning fossil fuel? So we answer that by saying, we're going to stop burning fossil fuel. That is real zero. Net zero will be seen as more and more of a whitewash, more and more of just actually let's continue using fossil fuel, let's continue making them, let's continue using them. We'll just buy these crummy little carbon credits and our politicians will swallow them because we haven't given them any choice. I'm giving, my company's giving, all the people who around the world are saying, yeah, I understand you now. Real zero is the only answer. We can stop burning fossil fuels, therefore we must stop burning fossil fuels. That is real zero.
Andrew, how does it make you feel? You're very much a proud Australian, and your success story is obviously something everyone in Australia is aware of. How does it make you feel when you turn on the news and you see unprecedented fires in your country? You see wildfires on Greek islands, Italian islands, the earth literally burning. I mean, this is now driving you to address this.
Yeah, look, the fossil fuel sector has been responsible for this. I mean, marine ecologist. I study the works of Jacques Cousteau and others. If you just read their early books, they say the world is beginning to burn. You read the ecologists now, they say the world is burning. We need to move away from the heartbreak of people who know the science, the heartbreak of people who care for their children, and give them solutions. Let them know there are solutions. We're going to hold our industrial leaders to account to take those solutions, because you, consumer, you mum, you dad, you boys and girls need and therefore deserve the solution which is available, and that's green energy and green hydrogen.
Well, we've got a fantastic panel on this. Let's meet our guests. Joining me in the studio is Bob Ward. He is the Policy and Communications Director for the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment, and that's at the London School of Economics. Also with us is Glada Lahn. She is Senior Research Fellow, Environment and Society Programme at the Royal Institute of International Affairs. That's at Chatham House. And Christopher Caldwell is the CEO of United Renewables, a company that helps to develop renewable energy projects. Great to see you all in the studio. Glada, I'll come to you first. You were actually at COP. Success or failure, how did you feel coming away?
So this was the largest multilateral gathering, I think, ever. It was huge, and that in itself was incredible, given the tensions in the world at the moment, the distrust in the multilateral system. There were successes and failures, and it really depends where you're coming from, what your expectations were on this. The UAE presidency did a good job in bringing everyone to consensus. Nobody walked out. They came up with, this was the COP where it was supposed to be taking stock of where everyone was since the Paris Agreement in 2015. And it did that quite effectively, but of course, there were limitations on that. There was, I guess, of most significance, and the thing that got talked about most was the agreement to put fossil fuels and the transition away from fossil fuels into the text. That was amazing because this was the 28th COP, and fossil fuels, oil, coal and gas, which are a major, burning them is a major cause of climate change, had never been mentioned in the text before. Coal had been mentioned, not oil and gas. So that in itself happened. There was lots of wrangling over that. Some people felt it had been far too watered down and it should just say a rapid phase out. It did talk, however, about a just, managed and equitable transition away from fossil fuels, something like that. And I think that's important in terms of it laying the groundwork for really looking at the nuts and bolts in terms of what's needed, the packages that are needed to help countries with less capacity to manage the diversification, the move away from dependence on export of those high carbon fuels, to help them to manage that. And I think that, it sort of lays the foundations for richer countries to take a lead and also to help developing countries.
Bob, time is something we don't have if you believe all of the science and you listen to people who know what they're talking about. I mean, progress seems to be maddeningly slow, is the phrase you used earlier on to me. 197 countries, getting an agreement, I guess it's vital.
Well, when you think about it, trying to get consensus amongst 197 countries on anything is amazing. So it is very slow, these annual meetings, these summits. But the fact that we are making progress is a sign that every country now does understand that there's a problem that we have to address. We're just not moving quickly enough. And that's because we've got countries with very different backgrounds, very different sets of priorities. You have developing countries that are very poor, but very exposed and vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And then you have, on the other hand, very rich countries that are probably rich because of their fossil fuels, also trying to reach the same agreement. So the fact that we've made progress is good, but we are running out of time, particularly in regard of the critical threshold of trying to limit warming to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius above its pre-industrial level. This last year, 2023, was the warmest year on record. According to the latest analysis, we got to 1.48 degrees above pre-industrial level. We're perilously close to that threshold. Beyond that threshold, the impacts become much more severe extreme weather around the world, but we also run the risk of crossing major thresholds in the climate system, such as destabilization of the polar ice sheets, that could lead to several meters of sea level rise around the world. And we want to stay very clear of those kinds of impacts.
Thanks, Bob. Chris, as we move away from fossil fuels, renewables obviously are the future. I think a lot of business people will be looking at what you do and asking the question, can we actually make money out of this?
Yes, Enda, thank you for the question. Of course we can. It's an absolute certainty that we can. We've already gone through the tipping point where it is cheaper on a levelized cost capital basis to be building renewables rather than fossil fuel equivalents. Now, as my two kind of colleagues were saying, we have hit, we've gone through a threshold from COP where it's now inevitable that fossil fuels will be phased out. Regardless, well, phased out, phased down, it doesn't matter. The actual language doesn't matter. Where we've got a 1.5 degree ultimate goal, 2 degrees being the top end. The only way of doing that, according to the science, is by rapidly phasing out fossil fuels and replacing it with renewables. On pure economics basis, as long as you have the systems in place to be able to get the finance across and the plannings and all of those other regulatory hurdles you need to get through in place, then you will be building renewables all day long. The problem comes when you've got other factors standing in your way, particularly like in the UK, we've got big regulatory hurdles in England, which don't exist in Scotland. If you can even things out, we can make a very successful transition.
Glada, all the move seems to be away from fossil fuels, and yet here in the UK we have a Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who's been announcing new deals, new licences to drill for oil and gas in the North Sea. I mean, at what point do we need leaders to step up and actually lead on this?
Yeah, it really feels like we've gone backwards in the UK. And I think that what we do need to see, and as I mentioned, there's a lot of distrust in the system right now, especially between Global South and Global North. You know, how can you be telling us that we need to phase out fossil fuels if you are exploring for more? And really, you know, in the UK example, those developments are not going to solve our energy security problem. That is very clear. They're not going to be economic or even create the long-lasting sustainable jobs that the region needs to see. So it's playing to a small constituency of the economy here in the UK that's not to the benefit of the majority. I think it's countries like the UK, Canada, Norway, Australia, they need to be leading in saying, here's our plan for phase out, you know, here are our end dates, we're going to work towards this. That gives a lot more security and confidence for investors, actually, because then they know how to stagger their investments and they know when to pull out of certain investments and push into green and clean and regenerative ones.
Bob, you've met Andrew Twiggy Forrest a few times. He's one of the richest people ever. What's your take on him? You know, we heard what he had to say in the interview I did earlier on. I mean, an extremely wealthy man, ludicrously wealthy. And he's now obviously realised that there's money to be made in renewables.
Well, he's certainly not a cuddly environmentalist. He's a hard-headed businessman, and he wants to make more money. And what he has seen is that fossil fuels are not the way of making money. He wants lots of cheap green energy to power his industrial processes. And he is now very much arguing for governments to stop holding back this revolution. We've just heard that green energy is cheaper in most parts of the world now. Even if you weren't interested in climate change, there's clear economic sense for doing it. And the problem is that governments are generally not moving quickly enough to help with the investment that's required. Lots of people want to invest, like Andrew Forrest, in the development of green energy very rapidly. It would help the economy, it would create jobs, it would generally help us deal with a lot of problems, not just climate change. Air pollution is another major problem that's caused by fossil fuels. So his message to governments is, hurry up, give us the policies we need, and then let the investors come in and create a whole new, better economy for everybody.
Chris, just on that point, when you get someone as phenomenally successful as Andrew Forrest deciding that this is the way forward, and not only will this save the planet, it will make people like him an awful lot more money. I mean, this must excite you as someone that's in the industry.
Of course it does. Of course it does. But it's just common sense. Like we have already, as like COP has shown, the fossil fuels are on the way out. This is the way forward. It is the greatest. The energy transition is the greatest wealth creation opportunity of our generation. It's also the greatest challenge of our generation. When we need to seize it with both hands. If we waiting tomorrow is too late to be starting. We need to be on this today. And for what governments need to be doing to be supporting this is just giving us long-term, as someone who's in the market, who is a developer who builds these assets, we need long-term, not investment, long-term regulation. We need to be able to see that there's a path. We're building 20-year, 25-year assets. We need to be sure that once we start, that it can be completed, that the planning process isn't going to be pulled out from us. Policies aren't going to be changing on a handbrake turn, as is happening, unfortunately, in the UK. But if you have a look at the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act in the US or the Inflation Reduction Act that the Biden administration has put through, those are really good examples of you build a factory in a community, it creates jobs, it creates wealth. The long-term impacts of the energy transition will be seen, and it'll be very hard for a new administration to be turning that around because the jobs are there. You can't just shut down factories.
Glada, Andrew Forrest in his interview referred to all these fossil fuel lobbyists as little green men in their suits milling around. There was a small army of them at COP, from what I heard. They must be worried.
Yeah, I think it was the largest contingent of fossil fuel company representatives, well over 2,000 in Dubai, which is quite incredible. Of course, companies are trying to catch up with developments. There's people working on investments in new technology like hydrogen, diversifying their portfolio into renewables and so on, and in creating more efficiencies. And there was a pledge made by the fossil fuel companies headed by the UAE on reducing methane emissions and on incentivizing efficiency. Not so many hard targets and interim points that we can hold them to account on. I think that need to go further on that. We should definitely be worried about the influence because their core business model is still very strongly fixed on the rents that come out of digging things up and burning them. So it's I think the problem with the fossil fuels industry is that they have held things back for many, many years. And, we would have wanted to start the conversations we'd had in Dubai 20 or 30 years ago. And because they were holding, spreading doubt within the science and so on climate for many years, it's been problematic. Now you see companies making, putting in place goals on net zero and net zero emissions, and making some efforts to push capital into new industries. Only a fraction, though, of the capital gains that they've made off the back of the rise in the prices of oil and gas, for instance. So I think that needs to be carefully watched. How much of that money, of that profit, is really going into sustainable diversification?
Bob, are we at a tipping point or have we gone over it?
Well, there are two types of tipping points in the climate argument. One are tipping points in the climate system, which if we go beyond, we end up suffering inevitable, irreversible, major impacts on the climate. But we are, I think, at a different kind of tipping point, and that's in the economy, where the cost of being green is much cheaper than fossil fuels. Look, fossil fuel industries are dinosaurs. They are facing extinction. It's inevitable that they are going to die out, but there is a danger that they slow us down in the transition, eke out a living for a bit longer out of fossil fuels, that what they end up doing is taking us over into having lots of impacts on climate change that will make people suffer around the world. It will damage lives and livelihoods around the world. Now, we cannot do that. We cannot save the dinosaurs. We should be hastening the end and ushering a new era of clean energy, which will be much more equitable. It will be much better. At the moment, the world is held to ransom by a group of countries in OPEC, the biggest oil producers. It's a cartel. They manipulate the supply of oil around the world in order to keep oil prices high. That's not in the best interest of the world. The sooner we see the end to OPEC and an end to the fossil fuels, the better for the whole world.
Chris, final question to you. You must be excited about the opportunities out there for your business. Just talk us through what you think in the coming years we will see from the renewables industry.
Ooh, that's a very good question. We need to see a massive amount of scaling up. So one thing that came out of COP was an agreement to triple the amount of renewables. Now, that is something that, it sounds in itself really exciting, but when you look at it, that is the natural course of things anyway. We've gone, I think we're about 12% now, and the tripling of renewables will get us, the target is to get it to kind of 40-odd%. So it's only slightly above the current path. But to achieve that, we need to be changing our planning regimes. We need to be making things easier, having the planners saying, yeah, need to have a really good reason to be turning down a renewable energy plant rather than a really good reason to be putting it up. If you can do that, we have supply chains being created all around the world. European Union is investing heavily in its own renewable energy supply chains. China, US. China is the biggest renewable energy producer in the world, which is actually in itself a very exciting thing. I'm very positive about the future for renewables. I think that the energy transition is happening. The only question is whether it's happening quickly enough.
Just briefly, we can turn this round?
We can turn this round. We have got all of the technology we need. We've got something like 85-90% of all the technologies that we need. What we need is the political will to be able to push it through. Nothing more, nothing less.
Chris, Glada, Bob, thank you all so much for your insight. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.